Now I'm going to go ahead and in a more speedy way color correct this image, add some adjustment layers, and then do a smart filter. So I'm starting out by bringing out my layers panel, and I am going to click on my adjustments panel and then add a new curves adjustment layer. Now I can do that this way, or I can just click right on that. I have also expanded my curves adjustment panel, and you can do that too by clicking on this little button in the lower left hand corner. First thing I'm going to do, you should be pretty used to this, is holding down my Option or Alt key and grabbing either the light point or the shadow point, doesn't matter which, and choosing or finding your highlight and shadow point. So here's my shadow. This is the darkest area of my image. I'm holding down my Shift key. Now if I hold down my Shift key and I don't see the color sampler tool, I might have to come up here and click on this click and drag button, and then you see it appear. Now I'm holding down my Option key and I'm choosing the highlight, and again holding down my Shift key and adding a probe. I don't have to set my highlight and shadow. I can quickly go through and say this is my highlight, this is my shadow, and then make sure none of these are selected by clicking again on the last one that you used. Now I'm going to find a gray in this image, and you can see there's lots of gray in here. I'm going to go ahead and click on the click and drag button, hold down my Shift key and add another sample here. And you can see that in this particular sample that the values that are appearing are 189, 200, and 206. Now I can even shift drag this to other grays if I want, and you can see the values are pretty consistent. That green is in the middle, blue's a little high, and red's a little low. So typically if you're looking at a good neutral in an image, and this could be the shadow in a shirt, a white shirt, could be the macadam of a driveway, a countertop, anything that you know is to be gray. It's casted if it's not perfectly balanced. And what I mean by casted is it's maintaining some kind of color that doesn't belong in there. What I typically do is I look at the middle value, not green because it's in the middle, but the middle value because it's 204. And the other red value is underneath it, and the blue value is more than it. And I'm just going to say, okay, blue, you need to be 204. Red, you need to be 204. So I start out by going to red. I hold down my Command key, and I click on this point, and it leaves a little dropper point on that curve, and then I can take and click and drag until I change that value of red to 204. Now remember, I'm looking at the second value after the slash. Go into blue, hold down my Command key, click on that gray, and then I drag that down to 204. Okay, so this image might not have looked like it needed a lot of work, but if we go back to the layers panel, you'll see that if I turn this off, look at the cast that was there. In fact, I'll close up the info palette, but you see that there was a cast. Look how much healthier his skin tone looks, how much more rich the colors look. Typically when you do color correction, it's also referred to as removing dirtying colors, so it can be a huge help. Now let's say that we want to do something like lighten him up a bit. I'm going to go ahead and add another adjustment layer. But before I do this, I'm going to take my lasso tool and do a really quick lasso selection. And it doesn't have to be perfect at all. And you know why, because you can edit it. And I'll choose Refine Edge and I'll feather it a bit. And make sure it's feathered. That looks a little funky, but that's okay. And then I'll choose that I want another curves adjustment layer, and I'm not setting highlight and shadow in here. I'm simply opening up the image by lightening it up. And then I'll take my paintbrush tool, change this to 2 columns so you can see that I'm painting with white, make my brush size larger, softer, shift left bracket, and kind of paint in where I want this to be a little lighter. Now, don't forget, you can also lighten up other areas. The really great thing is that I'm not just using this for him. I might want to go into an area that's dark back here and lighten that up as well. And I can double click on this and open up that tone curve and continue to lighten this or darken it depending upon what I need. But this is a heck of a lot better than using your dodge and burn tool that will allow you to go into destructive territory where you actually are eliminating pixels. By using an adjustment layer and retouching this way and painting your tone curve in, you can continually go back and adjust it more or less as you need or even paint varying amounts of tonal adjustments by changing the opacity of your brush. So right here, I'm painting 100% white. Now what if I want this to be a little bit darker down here? I can press X and I can paint over this area, but maybe I only want it to be 50% darker. I can press 5 and now I'm only painting a 50% tone curve. So if I look at this curve by holding down my Option or Alt key, you can see that I'm painting varying amounts on this mask. Okay, now let's do another adjustment layer. This time, I'm going to go ahead and take my magic wand and I'm going to say, you know what, I want to select this blue. And I'll do my best I can. It might need to be pulled up in tolerance, maybe to like a 50. I don't want to say to take non-contiguous colors because I don't want it to go into all the blueberries that are hanging on the bushes. So I'm just using my Shift key and adding to my selection. I could also use something called color range. If you like going in and creating a mask, there is something called color range. Let me just show you how that works here so that you have an idea. I'm deselecting and choosing color range, and using this method you could click on a color that you want to select. You can also shift click if you've missed some of the color, but the difference being here that you're seeing the mask being built as you work, and you can increase the tolerance by increasing the fuzziness. And that went a little too far, so I'm going to undo that, Command Z, and choose to make my mask this way. Now, I'm going into HueSaturation because maybe I want to change the color of this shirt. I can do one of two things. I can change the hue, which is essentially the color, or I can colorize this and totally just restart the color with another color. And maybe I'll choose that I want this to be purple. Again, if this is not an exact mask, I can go in and I can update it as many times as I want, even going back in to my adjustment layer and choosing that maybe I want this to be more of a yellow and more saturated, because that'll just work out better for this picture. But I can change it as many times as I want, and if I open this up, you'll see that I have not yet destroyed this image. Now I'm turning all those back on. I want to apply Unsharp mask. If I come into the background and I choose that I want to convert this for smart filters and I make a change, you'll notice that when I make that change, I'm not seeing all the color changes that I've made. So what I'm going to do before I apply that filter is I'm selecting all of my layers. I'm right-clicking. I'm saying Convert to Smart Object. I'm now choosing that I don't have to convert it for smart filters because I already did that. I'm going down to Sharpen Unsharp Mask, and you'll see that it does come up at the 100% view. And I did explain this real briefly in a previous lesson, but it's critical to understand this in the whole scheme of color correction. I really want to make this image have impact. So I'm adjusting the sharpness, and if you remember what I said before, if you don't have any clue what you're doing, start at 150. Depending upon the subject matter, you can bring it up or down. Children, typically you can go a little higher. But the amount, even though it goes up to 500%, is not nearly as critical as the threshold. And you'll see that if I bring this way up, how noisy the picture looks. Threshold right now is indicating that every little pixel that is one shade different than the pixel next to it should have sharpness applied to it, or a little halo created from this radius. If I change this to 10, you'll see that it smooths out some of those areas. Now I do have this still exaggerated, but now you'll see it keeps it smooth where the pixel colors are the same, and as soon as it hits an edge, it does create that little halo around the object. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring the value down to something more reasonable, and you'll still see when I click and hold, it turns off the sharpening. When I release, it turns it back on, and you can see that you get all sorts of details. Look at the details you get in the fabric. Whether you're doing print or web, it's a really good idea to make your images pop by applying this Unsharp mask, and you typically do it when you're done retouching, because otherwise if you're painting and you're making some other changes, those areas that you're working on will not have the sharpening applied to it. Now I'm pressing OK. I now again have a mask that I can use, because perhaps I want to come in here and I want to choose that this area back here is not sharpened. So I can take my paintbrush, make it larger, press 0 to make sure I'm at 100%, and paint out the sharpness here. And I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that these areas, when I press X, sharpening, press X, no sharpening. In fact, let me go ahead, double click on this, exaggerate this so you can see that when I come in here, X, sharpening, see? Don't want sharpening, X, paint black. But again, painting where I want that Unsharp mask applied and where I don't want it applied. I'll go back, double click on this, bring that back to a more reasonable amount. I could probably go up to about 200 on this. Click OK. Remember, always view your images when you're applying filters at 100%, or better yet, you can just use actual pixels, and then you can see really clearly that Unsharp mask and how well, turn it off or on, that it's impacting the image. Great, so in that short amount of time, I went in, I applied a couple different curves adjustment layers, and I also went in and changed the color of the shirt really quickly, and also applied Unsharp mask. And if I go back into the history panel, scroll all the way to the top, look at the difference in that image. Again, it had a color cast. Many times your eyes trick you in thinking an image looks okay, and it's really not. And it also can be the effects of lighting if you're working in an office with fluorescent lights. Another good reason, read those values, look for a neutral where you can, and read those values and correct based upon what you see in your info palette.